Right, good evening. Good to see you all. My name is James Kenley. I serve as the executive director of the Vail Symposium, and on behalf of our board of directors, thank you for spending your evening with us. The Vail Symposium has been offering affordable, thought-provoking programming to the Vail community since 1971, a scant few years before John arrived here in town. We are a nonprofit organization, and donors at every level allow us to bring our mission to our community. So I'd like to thank a few organizations and individuals before we get started. Our presenting sponsors are discovervail.com, that's the town of Vail, and the Frechette Family Foundation.
All right. Pete Frechette.
Our event sponsors are Vail Resorts Epic Promise, the Vail Daily, and the Antlers at Vail. This summer season is generously underwritten by Cindy Engels, and tonight's program was developed in partnership with the Vail Alliance for Purposeful Living and is supported by Manor Vail and our beautiful venue this evening, the Edwards Interfaith Chapel. Would you please give those folks a round of applause?
Hey.
And tonight's program is a beautiful deep dive into how each of us has the opportunity to lead in all facets of our lives. First, to be our lens into this important topic and to guide us through our program this evening, it's my pleasure to introduce John Horan-Cates. John's credentials are too extensive to recount in full, and I know several of you in the audience know him well. If you are lucky enough to know John, you know that the credentials are just the means, they're not the end for John. He's been an influential member of our community since 1974, serving as the marketing mind behind Vail and Beaver Creek. He founded a small nonprofit called the Vail Valley Foundation, and he's also the founder of the Vail Alliance for Purposeful Living and our partner for this evening's program. Our special guest tonight actually once called Cordillera home and is the author of a new book that we will discuss tonight. And we've got some copies in the backdrop there and for sale out at the table, entitled, Don't Wait for Someone Else to Fix It, 8 Essentials to Enhance Your Leadership Impact at Work, Home, and Anywhere Else That Needs You. And you may be surprised at how many places need you, all of us. He was a senior executive at American Express Financial Advisors and has spent the last 2 decades researching leadership and coaching both aspiring and seasoned leaders. We are so fortunate to welcome Chuck Wachendorfer back to his old stomping grounds.
I miss my old stomping grounds, yeah.
And it's my honor to hand things over to John to get the conversation started.
Great. Thank you, James. Thank you. Yeah, great pleasure to be here and to talk about a subject which is near and dear to our hearts, and it's good to have Chuck here, and we're going to try to attract you back to the Vail Valley.
I'd love to be back.
I've been fortunate to read a lot of leadership books over the years and interact with people who are experts and so forth, and I must say that I have found your book to be really one of the best,
Thank you.
In part because it goes well beyond the what it is that we ought to be doing in leadership, which is more well known. But I think the emphasis in Chuck's book, he and Doug have written, talks a lot about how to do that, and becomes very specific about how do you actually implement a sense of responsibility. How do you act from an integrity point of view? And so I found it to be really, really well done, and I would encourage everyone to pick it up. But because it is so comprehensive, at least I felt, that maybe, and you've been on a book tour, so maybe you're able to handle this, but how would you describe this whole effort in a short summary? Not 12 minutes.
Yeah, no, it's
2 minutes.
It's a toolbox. It's a toolkit, and like some of the other books that we've all read, when Doug and I were thinking about writing this book, we wanted to write a book that stood the test of time, that people could use anywhere in any part of their lives. It was not role specific or title specific. Our vision at Think to Perform is the firm that we lead. And our vision at Think to Perform is to enhance the world by improving the decision-making and performance of the individuals and organizations we touch. And we crafted that vision statement back in 2005. And the phrase enhance the world we thought about very specifically. And so everything we've done at the company, we've done with how do we get more of our content out to more people so they can use it. And so it is a toolkit. You don't have to use all 8. You could pick any chapter, any one of the 8 essentials and start to apply it. It is very application focused. At Think to Perform, we work with executives, athletes, business owners to improve decision making under pressure. We'll talk about that tonight. And we make about 35,000 decisions a day. I don't know if that surprises anybody. So how we, get dressed in the morning, how we take our coffee, brushing our teeth, those are all decisions we make. And we don't have to make all 35,000 better, but if we made 1 or 2 better choices a day, you're talking about 500, 600, 700 better decisions a year. And if you've ever been to any kind of a reunion, like a school reunion, we're going to my partner's 40th high school reunion here in a couple of weeks. If you've ever been to a family reunion or a school reunion, you walk into a room like this, right? And there's filled with all the people you used to hang out with, and somebody sees you from across the room and goes, "Hey, John, how are you, man?" Right? And you have no idea who this person is, right? Have you had that happen? And then you go, "Oh, that's Chuck." And the very next thought that pops into your mind is, hopefully it's your inside voice, what the hell happened to that guy? Right? And that's 35,000 decisions a day, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years of your life. And so in order to get different results in my life or my business, it begins with me making better choices or different choices.
Well, I think the emphasis that you've just touched on is this whole concept of the book is not really about leading a big organization only. It may involve...
It's not a business book, leadership book. No, you're right.
How to lead, but it's also about how to lead your life. And I think that is sometimes confused when we talk about the topic of leadership. It's some CEO kind of guy, but we're all leaders. And so I think this book applies across the board to everyone. In the book, Chuck, you define leadership as the power to influence others. So how is that manifested itself in your own life? What's your own experience of that power to influence?
Good to see you, Brian. Just to expand the point here. So a lot of times, especially in business, people think about leadership as a certain office or a certain title or a certain position. And our point of view, our position is everybody's a leader. So let me ask you a couple questions. Are you influenced by what you read, by what you watch, what you listen to, and who you hang out with? The answer would be yes, right? And the second question then is some of what you do observable by other people? And the answer is yes. So we're both leading and we're influencing and being influenced all the time, whether we intend to or not. How many parents do we have in the room? I see Magda, good to see you. Brian's a parent, I'm a parent. So I remember when my son was 4, he's 27, he grew up here in Edwards, and he's a pro snowboarder, but when he was 4 years old, he was walking down the stairs and the dog bumped into him, and he said, "God damn it, Nick." And my wife looks at me and she goes, "He sounds just like you." Right? That's the footprint, whether we intend to or not, that we have on our children. And so the same is true about people that we work with, people that are other people in our family, our friends, our community. We're always influencing, and so the position that we take is everybody's a follower, we're influenced, and everybody's a leader. We influence other people whether we intend to or not. And that influence can be positive, and it could be less than positive.
I love the expression. I don't know who the author was, but it's more important about what you do than what you say. And so the actions,
Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Is that Emerson?
What you do speaks so loudly I cannot hear what you say.
Yeah. And so our actions really speak to and reflect who we are. So this book, I think, touches on that in a great way. In the book, you mentioned it already, there's 8 essential leadership principles that Chuck and Doug talk about. And maybe rather than all 8, what 1 or 2 really stand out to you, and give us maybe a more extensive description of 1 or 2 of those.
Yeah, we talk about in the book is what's called a leadership logic chain. And so there's 4 steps to the leadership logic chain. So if I want to be more effective with other people, if I want to increase my influence with other people, increasing my influence or becoming more effective involves me managing my own behavior. So to have more influence, to be more effective, I have to do a better job of managing my own behavior. Managing my own behavior begins with me making better choices. Making better choices is grounded in self-awareness. So you follow the chain. It's influence with other people begins with me managing my behavior. Managing my behavior begins with me making better choices. Making better choices is grounded in self-awareness. So it's almost counterintuitive that for me to build a great relationship with somebody else, with you, the person I have to pay the most attention to is me. Right? And think about people in your own life, people that don't have great relationships. How good are they at managing themselves? Usually not very. Right? And typically are not very self-aware. And so here's the fly in the ointment around self-awareness. Those people who are not self-aware, of course, don't know it. Otherwise, they'd be what? Self-aware. Right? And so, we've been only at this maybe 15 or 20 minutes. How many of you in the last 15 or 20 minutes have mentally left the room? Anybody? Or let me ask you this. How many of you have been in a conversation with somebody else and you're nodding and smiling and they're telling you something and you realize that what they're telling you, you shouldn't be nodding and smiling about? Right? That's you not paying attention to somebody else. Or another one, you're reading an article or a book and you've read 10 pages and you have no idea what you read. That's you not paying attention to yourself. So it's part of the normal human condition is we check out. Right? And when we check out, it affects our decision making and our performance. We're hardwired to be what's called emotionally reflexive. When I feel something, my body wants me to respond very quickly, and our emotions tend to sacrifice accuracy for speed. They want us to respond very quickly and are usually wrong. So the worst time to make any important decision is when we're emotional. Right? So what we talk about in the book, back to your question, is if I want to do a better job of influencing other people, then I really have to do the best job of managing myself. A lot of times at Think to Perform, when we get brought in to an organization or to a company, it sounds something like this. We get brought in by senior executives, and they're like, if you just fix these people over here, we'll be fine. And what we have to help them realize is the reason this group of people may not be performing is the leaders are contributing to this dysfunction. They just don't see it. And so that's where the awareness comes in, is we teach an exercise, and I think you allude to it later on in some of the questions you had. We teach an exercise called the freeze exercise. And the freeze is, what am I thinking? How am I feeling? What am I doing? You can play this right now. You can write this down. What am I thinking? How am I feeling? What am I doing? So the human experience is we're always thinking, always feeling, always doing. So human beings are linear thinkers. We think one thought at a time. So even trying not to have a thought is a thought. And by the way, smart people don't think more thoughts, they just think smarter thoughts. And with emotions, we feel more than one thing at a time. So I can be happy and sad, nervous and excited. And then actions are either voluntary or involuntary. So I'm either, speaking would be a voluntary action. Blinking or breathing would be involuntary. So part of being present is being physically, mentally, and emotionally present. So right now, write down, what am I thinking? Just take a second to write that down if you have a piece of paper. What am I thinking right now? How am I feeling? And try and be as specific as you can. How do you feel right now? I mean, you could be tired, you could be hungry, you could be engaged, you could be curious. I mean, there's a whole range of emotions. And then what are you doing? Now, everybody in here except maybe James is sitting down. But why do I care about what you're doing? Why would I care about that? This is the interactive part of the program. Why do I care about what you're doing? Because 70% of communication is body language, facial expression, body language. 20% is tone and volume. 10% are the words I use. So if I want to communicate I'm interested, my body has to match how if I intend to communicate I'm interested, my body language has to match. Remember when our kids were younger than 4? If we weren't looking at them, they didn't think we were listening. Right? Remember that? Like, I'm listening to you. No, you're not. You're doing the dishes or whatever it is. So you got to stop and go, okay, you got my full attention. That's being physically, mentally, and emotionally present. So did anybody play the freeze? So what am I thinking? How am I feeling? What am I doing? Anybody want to volunteer what they wrote down?
Come on.
Anybody? I'm not going to put you on the spot. Well, let me ask a different question. Did anybody realize when I said freeze that they weren't paying attention? Anybody? It's okay, right? Because if we're not paying attention and we realize we're not paying attention, what might we do? We could pay attention, or we could go do something else. But the point is, if I practice this 5, 6, 7 times a day, I become more self-aware. We teach the freeze exercise to doctors and nurses in surgery. Now, why would you want your doctor or nurse calling a freeze if you're in the operating room? Who do you want them paying attention to? Me, right? And one of the biggest risks in surgery is a distracted surgical team. They do the wrong procedure on the wrong body part. I had my knee operated on at Stedman last year. Probably a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, something like that. And, everybody on the surgical team came in and initialed my knee.
Right, mine too.
Right? Why did they do that? Because everybody wants to be focused on the right body part, doing the right procedure. And so the freeze helps me be alert to whether or not I'm paying attention. And if I notice I'm getting emotional, right? If I notice I'm getting emotional, what could I do about that? How many of you believe stupid is optional? Everybody's hands should go up. Stupid is only optional if I catch myself getting upset. If I don't catch myself getting upset, that's when stupid becomes less optional. Think about regrets we all have in our own lives. Our regrets usually come from when we got emotional. So how do we make stupid optional? And that's one of the tools that we talk about in the book is how do we improve our decision making? Well, it begins with playing the freeze. And the freeze is this, what am I thinking? How am I feeling? What am I doing? And you could play it 5, 6, 7 times a day for the rest of your life. I guarantee you it'll improve your decision making and performance in any area of your life.
Interesting. So for me, one of the things that comes up in this whole self-awareness realm is in the area of communications. And if you think about it, at least I do it, oftentimes when somebody's talking to me, I'm not really listening. I'm thinking about my answer. How am I going to come back? Mm-hmm. And so the self-awareness notion is really trying to urge us, don't do that. Listen. Be fully present rather than figure out how am I going to come back? How am I going to counter that point of view? And so self-awareness is that's one of the 8.
Knowing your real self is the second essential. So we talk about, we'll do an exercise here tonight. The first is aim to be your ideal self. So I had to know who I hope to be. but then it's also paying attention to my real self, because my behavior often does not align with my intentions. How do we know that? How do we know our behavior sometimes falls short of our intentions? It's when we say things like, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant to do. That's not what I meant to say. Right? So the point is not to be, the part of the human condition is none of us is perfect. I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but we're not going for perfection here. We're trying to go for progress. So the thinking is, can I be my ideal self more often? Well, it involves me knowing who I hope to be, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, but then it's also paying attention to what my behavior is. We tend to judge ourselves by our intentions. Other people judge us by our behavior. People who know us well, when we make a mistake, give us what? What do they give us when we make a mistake? The benefit of the doubt. Right? It's like, well, that's not what John meant to do. That's not what John meant to say. Here's what he was really going for. Right? But most people don't know us well, and so they just judge us on our behavior. But we judge ourselves by our intentions. So we're trying to align our behavior with our intentions. But I got to know both. I got to know, who do I hope to be, and who am I really? What's my behavior? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Very interesting topic. And one of the things that came to mind, though, I wanted to ask you about was, how'd you come up with the title? Don't wait for someone else to fix it. That's not a normal leadership book title.
Right.
Where'd that come from?
Well, it's a funny story. We had a tentative title, which was really boring. The title of the book was going to be Leadership Intelligence. And it was going to be Leadership Intelligence because Doug, my co-author, who's also the CEO of our company, has written Moral Intelligence, Financial Intelligence. This is like the 5th or 6th book that he's written. And so he was going with the whole intelligence brand.
Yeah. Which
we kind of liked, but we didn't resonate with. It's kind of like naming your kid, right? You have a list of names, but I don't know if you were like when my kids were born. We finally decided on the name when we were in the delivery room, and it was none of the names we picked. But so this was kind of this thing. So we were shopping our book to publishers, and the first publisher we were referred to was Barrett Kohler. I don't think it matters if I name who they were. And the guy, the editor, was listening to our pitch. We had put together a big book proposal, and he goes, "Oh, this sounds like Don't Wait for Somebody Else." And we were like, "That's it? Don't wait for somebody else to fix it." And the publisher ended up turning us down, but we were so enamored with the title, we're like, we're running with that one. Don't wait for somebody else to fix it, because that's really the essence. That's the call to action, is like we were saying in the introduction, is we don't want, too many people are waiting around like, well, maybe John will fix that. Or our elected officials will fix that. Or the person who's the CEO of my company, he or she will fix that. And what everybody needs in our community, in our country, in our in the world, is people to do more to step up. And even if I made a little bit of an impact, it's going to make a positive difference. Yeah. And so that's the call to action.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the key. Again, so much of this can be academic and intellectual and high level, but it comes down to, okay, what are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. Are you going to step out? Are you going to take responsibility? So I was just curious where that came from. Yeah. Well, should we jump into values?
Sure.
Yeah. So values is one of the aspects of the book that really jumps out at the very, very beginning of the whole process. What are those values that you hold? And one of the things that that Chuck and his partners have done is created this deck of values cards. So we're going to pass those around, and maybe I'll let you, introduce how this might work. But I've used these, and it's really interesting because you'll see all of the things in here that I think are important. The exercise is what's most important, I think.
Absolutely. So a big word that we use in our firm, in our organization, is alignment. So what we're trying to do, whether we work with an individual or an organization or a business, is align the decision making and the behavior to create the results they want. And so alignment's a big word. So align to what, right? So that's where we start, is understanding somebody's values. So values are things that we use every single day to make decisions around our time, our money, and our resources, right? And when you pull somebody off the street and you say, do you have values? People act kind of insulted. Like, what do you mean? Do you think I don't have values? It's like, no, that's not the point. The second question is, what are they? So you have values. Everybody says they have values. What are they? And that's where it gets kind of fuzzy. You see things like, well, integrity, family. But the point here is, if values are so important and if values guide my decision making and my behavior, I ought to know what they are, right? I mean, that would make sense that I would know exactly what they are. And our values don't have to be the same to work together. We get that question a lot. Well, if we have different values, can I be married to him or her? You know, can I work with this guy if he has different values? The answer is yes, you can work with people who have different values, but the goal is we respect each other's values. Well, to respect somebody else's values, I got to know what they are so I can understand where he's coming from. I did this exercise with my parents years ago. My dad is going to be 90 in a couple months, and you know, when my dad did the values exercise, I was like, oh, this is how he sees the world. Like, I've known my dad my entire life. And for the first time when I saw his values, I was like, oh, this is why he does what he does. It was like, made perfect sense to me, right? So that's the whole idea. So we can pass these out now if you'd like, and I'll take you through the values exercise. We'll just pass these out. So we got an easel, so let me use. So I talked about alignment.
This is kind of
and we have this
a fun exercise
model. It's very simple, and it's in the book. Better pen? Okay. Well, and my handwriting's lousy, so I'll have to translate for you. So the alignment model
so you're not by yourself.
is 3 frames. And frame 1
there we go.
is my ideal self. That's who I hope to be on my best day. And that's made up of my values and my beliefs. Okay? Those are our intentions. But as I mentioned, part of being human is none of us is perfect. We're going to make mistakes. So over here what I have is my real self. That's what everybody else sees. This is my behavior. And this is made up of my thoughts. Sorry, my handwriting is bad. Thoughts, my feelings, and my actions. And so when I get clear on who I hope to be with my values, and I pay attention to my behavior through the freeze exercise, what I notice is my behavior falls short sometimes of who I hope to be. And that is the gap. So frame 2 are our goals. So goals are things I measure that enable me to tell whether or not I'm living consistent with my values. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
What we're going for? So I'm trying to align my behavior with my goals, consistent with my values. That's what I'm going for. So what we developed years ago was this deck of values cards, and the directions are in the box, but you don't need the directions. I'm going to take you through it today. So you can get rid of the directions. And what you'll notice is what you're left with is a card with a value on it and a definition. And by the way, there's more values than whatever the 55 cards we have in this box. But it's the most we could fit into one box. But that's why we have the blank cards. So you'll see some blank cards that look like this. And the blank cards are not for people that don't have values. The blank cards are for the fact that you might have a value that's not in this box. But for today, just for the exercise, what you're going to do is get rid of the blank cards and just stick with the cards that have the values and the definition. Okay, so the first step is to read each card and to sort the cards into important or not important. And the number of cards in each pile don't matter. So don't get caught up in, I got 3 cards in one pile and 50 cards in the other. Just sort, is important or not? And just use your gut. Is it important or not?
Yeah,
just
make a
take a minute and
fast
do that.
decision as well. I'm going to sit back here and do this myself.
Sure.
Can I sit here with you? Yeah. I haven't done this in years. Fame, of course.
Overachiever. All right, once you're done, take the cards that were not important and put them back in the box. So all you're left with are the cards you said were important.
Wow.
All right, for those that are finished, while we're waiting for everybody else that's still going, for those that are finished, was that easy or hard?
I thought it was
step.
easy.
Easy? 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 Anybody say it was hard? James says maybe, kind of hard. One in the back's hard. Yeah, there's no bad values. We didn't throw evil in there, or I think fame is probably the only one that was maybe a little sketchy, but they're all good values. What questions were you asking yourself to decide which pile they went into?
If I met somebody and he didn't have this, would I care?
Okay, so if you met somebody and they didn't have this, would it matter to me? That's great. That's great. Okay, excellent. Anybody else? Is this who I hope to be? That's a great question. Yeah. Am I kidding myself, or is this really who I am? Yeah. That's a great one, James. Okay, everybody done? Put the cards that were, yes. Yeah, you get all kinds of mind games going on, yeah. What would other people say this about me? Are these my values? Are this, who I hope to be or who I really am? Yeah, excellent. Okay, so put the cards that are not important back in the box. What you're left with is the important cards. And what I want you to do is get it down to 15. 15 cards only. Now, you got a big stack, so you got some work to do. You got them all. You put 3 back in the box. Yep, well, you still got to get down to 15. That's the homework. 15. Yeah? Great question, James. So James asked the question just so everybody here, are these my work values or are these my personal values? We're big believers in the old saying, wherever you go, there you are. So these are your values no matter where you are. Think about it from that context. So once you've got your 15, put the rest of the cards back in the box. In fact, you might do what this table's doing right here. Lay out your 15 right in front of you, face up like they have. You can see what they're doing. Lay your 15 out like 3 rows of 5 or wherever you got it. All right, how was that step for those who are finished? Is that harder, easier? Much harder. Why was that?
I work in a rather strange environment, and a lot of these things are essential, or I couldn't work in that environment.
I see. So it really was tough.
Wow, you got a lot. I think it's 15? Yeah. I'm down to 5.
Fantastic. So how did you narrow it down? What questions were you asking yourself?
I kept switching between cultures.
Oh, you did? Okay. Was it confusing?
I might be able to do 2 piles.
Sure.
This culture is different than the other culture. I mean, it's a third world country. What do I do with health?
Right.
I can put it in the box, but I'm taking a huge risk. It's not as important in this culture.
Right.
Sorry to be so complicated.
No, not at all. But I think the reason I ask is because it does get complicated and it does get hard. Sometimes what you can find is there are similar words.
Yeah.
Right? And then not necessarily speaking of your cultural difference, but like family and relationships. Which one resonates more with me? Or I can fit one underneath the other.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes, Chuck, when I've done this, I've used what I call the slash rule. So service and community are really related. So I call it, I combine them.
Well,
The slash rule.
it's not cheating. These are your values, so you can do whatever you want with it. The definitions on the card are just a definition, not the definition. So, for example, one of my values is meaningful work. Meaningful work means to me that what I do has an impact on the people that I work with, but it also has meaning to me, like it's interesting. Yeah. So you get to define, these are your values. You get to define them any way you want.
Yeah.
But you start asking yourself different questions as you start to narrow these things down. Anybody else ask themselves different questions this time around? No? Yes? What were you asking yourself this time?
Do I really care about this? Would I be able to do something like, I'm going to get an example, autonomy. Like, would I be okay having somebody else take care of me financially, emotionally, physically? No, just put it here. This is bad.
Great. Everybody hear her questions? Yes, so she was, one of her values was autonomy, and she was asking herself, would I be okay for somebody to take care of me physically, mentally, financially, and emotionally? And she said no, so she kept it. You know, another question sometimes we hear is you think back about big decisions, important decisions that you've made in your life, and like which values did you use to make that decision? So you can think about that, like inflection points in our lives. Okay, so, yes.
Is it fair to assume that even though your personality doesn't change once it's fixed with your mid to late teens to the rest of your life, your values change over time?
Did everybody hear his question?
Sure.
The question is, as I get older, do my values change? Is that it?
Fair to assume that.
Yes. So some of my values as a 25-year-old single guy are not the same as my values as a 62-year-old father of 3.
Wait, I got
At least you'd hope not, right? So, but yes, the answer to your question is yes. Some of our values change as our lives change or as we get older. I used to have adventure and courage as 2 of my top 5 values. And I remember when they changed. Exactly. I was on a bridge in New Zealand about to bungee jump, dive off this bridge. It was 400 feet. There was the river looked like this. That tell you how high how high the bridge was. The river looked like that, and the wind was whipping down this canyon, and the bridge was swaying like this. And I'm on this plank, thinking I'm living my values of adventure and courage, and I see my son was 6 years old at the time, and I thought to myself, if this doesn't work out for me, this could be bad not only for me, but also for him. And that's when I moved adventure and courage off my. We're going to get down to 5. So by the way, our top 15 values stay the same over the course of our lives, but I can't remember 15 values. So what we're going to do is get it down to what we can remember. So we're going to go from 15 down to 10. That's the next step. So take your 15 in front of you and take away 5. I want you to eliminate 5 values.
It's good to get people engaged, and thinking, rather than just hearing what somebody's going to say.
So once you get down to your 10, put the other 5 back in the box. Was it easier or harder, this step?
A little harder.
Harder?
Yeah.
Why was it harder?
Because you really didn't have to choose, but then some of them overlapped.
Yeah.
So you're like, I can still have that idealistic.
Sure.
And put this aside because I still have it.
Some of these lesser values could end up in your definition.
Some of them can end up in a definition. Absolutely. Right.
Now we're going to 10.
Well, we'll get to that. We got one more step. So we got 10. Anybody else have any thoughts going through or questions that
I
they
think
asked
one
themselves?
reason it's hard is that everything's important. I mean, almost everything in this deck is, in some way, important to us. What's most important?
I was really focused on which of these can I smuggle into the other ones.
Yeah. Well, like I was saying about meaningful work, health is one of my other values, and I used to define health as physical health, like exercise. And what I realized is that as I've gotten older, is the definition of health is much broader than exercise. It's physical, mental, financial, and emotional health. So that's an example of you broaden it, but what happened? Well, I'll tell you what happens after we finish. So the last step is you get down to 5. So you got to take your 10, cut it in half, get down to 5.
That's hard.
That's the last step, by the way.
That's hard. And then you're going to ask them to talk about one.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We got time.
Whatever. I think we're good.
Yeah.
You're already at 5.
Yeah, well, no, I
It's just a problem.
That's good. Wow. Nice. How are we doing? You already knew you were down to 5. Yeah, I'm down to 5. I've done it about 500 times. If I had known it's okay to send me a deck of cards. Right.
All right, once you have your 5, I see some of you are moving on. I would take a photo of them. Take a photo of your top 5 values, or write them down somewhere you can capture them.
Hi, honey.
Hi. Good.
Now, why do you think I asked you to take a photo or write them down? Why would I want you to take a photo of your values? Why would that be important? Bless you. What's that? You got to revisit them. Most importantly, you got to remember them. Right? So it's not just revisiting them. Here's what you can know. Performance in any area of life. I don't care what you do for a living. Performance in any area of life, regardless of race, gender, what you do, where you live, it doesn't matter, is a function of 3 things. It's a function of talent being things that we were always good at and can never remember learning. So things like math, music, sports, things we had a natural affinity for. Part number 2 are skills. Skills are things that I develop over my lifetime. So I may have had a talent for music, but I developed the skill to play the piano. And the third part of performance, and you want to guess what part 3 is?
Values.
Decision making. Right? It's talent plus skills plus decision making equals performance. And of the 3, what do you think has the biggest impact on performance? Decision making. Decision making has twice the impact on performance than talent and skill combined. I'm not saying talent and skill don't matter, they just don't matter as much as decision making. I mean, think about sports. It's the easiest example to think of. It's not always the most talented athlete on the field that performs the best when the game's on the line. It's the one who can handle the pressure and still make great choices. There's 2 drivers of becoming a great decision maker. The 2 things that affect decision making are moral competence and emotional competence. So moral competence is knowing my values. If I know my values, I'm more likely to use them when making a decision. It doesn't guarantee that I make the decision consistent with my values, but it increases the odds. So more than just revisiting them, I want you to remember them. So my top 5 values are meaningful work, health, spirituality, family, and integrity. Those are my 5. And back to the alignment model, if I know them and I can recall them, then I can more likely use it to guide my behavior. You follow me? But if I don't know them, then I'm more likely, my decision-making behavior is more at risk. Emotional competence, what is emotional competence, by the way? What's emotional competence? Yes?
I think it's being able to respond instead of react.
Yes. Yes. It's responding instead of reacting. That's a great way to say it. So, emotions aren't good or bad. It's what I do with the emotion that makes it good or bad. So back to the question around, is stupid optional? Stupid is only optional if I catch myself getting upset. So emotional competence is knowing how I'm feeling and managing how I'm feeling. So it's okay to get angry. It's probably not okay to yell at somebody or hit somebody, right? It would be more effective for me to say, I'm upset right now, than for me to yell at somebody. But for me to do that, I have to play the freeze exercise. That's where the freeze comes in. I have to catch myself getting upset to say, okay, I got to calm down right now. I got to go for a walk or whatever it is, a few deep breaths, so I don't react. I respond instead of reacting. So the point of values is knowing my values is, that's half of me becoming a better decision maker, is knowing my values. Then the freeze enables me to practice managing my emotions, the emotional competence. So everybody have their top 5?
Yep.
What I'd like you to do at the table is share with the table your top 5 values. And here's what I want you to do. Not just the words like family, meaningful work, health, whatever it might be. What I want you to do is talk about how you defined it. I was doing a workshop years ago with an executive team in Wisconsin, and we were going around the executive team. It was a big boardroom, and there was probably 10 or 12 people in the room, and everybody was sharing their values. And we got to this guy at the head of the table, and he shared one of his values was family. And I could see everybody in the room, their eyes rolled, like, oh, really? Like this guy's family? Well, it turns out the guy was a workaholic, and he spent no time with his family. So I said, I forget what the guy's name was. I said, Bob, tell me how you define the value of family. And he said, being a great provider. So according to how Bob defined the value of family, he was living that value of family. Now, what I'm going to encourage you to do is not just share your values at your table, but take these values home and share them with your family. Because what Bob found out was how his family defined the value of family was not how he defined the value of family. Right? So he got to make a decision about whose definition he went with. So my point is, as you share your values, talk about not only what they are, but how you define them. So if you do that, we'll give everybody, it's almost 7 o'clock, so we'll give like 10 minutes to do that. Share your top 5 values, talk about what they mean with people at your table. Okay, how we doing? Everybody good? Any learnings from the discussions at your tables? Yes. Shh. So you took 3 values down to 1? Yeah. Perfect. If that resonates with you, go with that. Right? Because that includes family, your community, your friendships, all that. Everybody hear what he just did? Tell me your name. Joe. So Joe, you want to say it a little louder? Thank you, James.
So as I was narrowing things down, I went from, I took like 2 or 3 ideas of the 2 or 3 values and found how they fit under they were subheadings under the main one. So for me, the one I picked was relationships because I wanted family to fit into there and community also fit under there, but they would exclude relationships almost.
That's beautiful. That's exact. So it resonates with you. These are your values. You get to do that. So now he understands, like when he thinks about relationships, it encompasses all those things. Anybody else have a different experience at the table, something they want to share?
So mine is two different 5s. I have 2 different sets of 5.
Well, you got a lot to remember then.
No, it's really not difficult.
Good.
Because when I'm here, there's a lot of luxury.
Yes. Yes.
Where I'm working, friendships are not and will not be a part of it.
Uh-huh.
Whereas friendship and family and tight connections to people are the luxury that I have in this culture.
Sure.
But in a third world culture, I work, I'm very good at what I do, I'm very effective, but it's not about friendship.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. Would you like?
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I ask an opinion
Yes,
question?
of course.
So I've seen it both ways, and I know kind of how I feel about it, but you have personal values
Yes.
that are true to you.
Yes.
I've seen other processes where you may have different sets of values for like work and income, family and relationships, health and wellness, and so forth. What's your thought on that?
I believe in what I said earlier, that wherever I go, there I am. So I try and bring myself wherever I am to work or family or friends or whatever. It's too hard for me to compartmentalize and too much for me to remember. And so I'm looking for simplicity on the other side of complexity. So what are the values that really, like, no matter where I am, I could live and feel good about? And then we have company values too, right? So our company's values some of them are different than my personal values, but I can live my personal values at my company. And that's kind of the understanding that we have, is if we're going to be our best selves, it involves me living my values. So I want to share my values with people at work because they can help me live those values.
I would think your values at work, are you an owner?
Yes.
So your values in your office would be the accumulation of the owner's values. So if you have multiple partners, is that the case for you?
I'm sorry?
Is that the case for you?
Our 4 values at work are people, integrity, growth, and excellence. Those are our 4.
You said that too fast.
People. And so we value all people. We value and we respect all people, so that it involves the clients that we work with, our vendors, people that work at the company. We value growth. So growth to us means we're helping our clients grow, but we're also growing our company, and we're also learning and growing. So we think about that in kind of a multifaceted. Well, I get to live my values. So I get to live my values at the company, even though integrity is only one of my values that are the company's values. And then excellence is the 4th value. So we always, instead of focusing on perfection, we always focus on doing our best.
Because I would think if they were diabolically opposed, it'd be a horrible case.
That's exactly right. And sometimes, Well, sometimes companies go through this exercise as a selection tool, because to that point, if my values don't jive with the company's values, what am I doing here? Right? I should go work somewhere else. And sometimes that happens. Yeah, absolutely. If I can't live my values at the company, what am I doing here? That's a great point. Anybody else? Magda?
You know, I'm going to share a value that I had, and it is to the point of the gentleman, which is how a personal value kind of goes towards your work. And I do believe that your personal values are an integral part of your work. One of my biggest values is faith. And it's not faith in like God or a religion, it's faith in people. You know, I believe that if I don't have faith in people, I have lost, the world will be dark for me. So I always believe that the other person has the right intentions. And I live like that, very trustworthy in the world. And it has, I have had my downsides, of course. But by showing that trustworthy in my work space, I receive the same thing. And it's a beautiful thing. And this is something very personal that I do with the family and with friends and so forth. Another thing is, I don't have a problem intertwining coworkers and friendship. And it has taught me a lot. Because, sometimes everybody likes self-guard quite a bit. And suddenly when you open up in your work, the other person does too. It's like a mirror. So what you said, Chuck, is so important, that your values have to reflect into everywhere that you do. And at the end of the day, it kind of defines also your workspace. That has been my experience, and it has been a positive one. So.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing. Okay, just to keep things moving, thanks, Magda. Here's what I want you to do. Any risk takers in the room? All right, risk takers? Okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's the exercise. So I want you to write that. You got your 5 values. I want you to score yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being perfect, 1 being not at all, on how consistently you think you live each value. So If health is a value, how do you score yourself on health? Family's a value or whatever, relationships are a value, give yourself a score. I'm not going to ask you to share it. I just want you to write the number down. And I want you to think about why you gave yourself the score you did. So if you gave yourself a 6, why did you give yourself a 6? So each value should have one number. And I want you to think about, well, what would I have to do to move that by one number? What else would I have to do to be closer to the 10? Now here's what's going to happen. Now that you know your values, you can't unknow them. So you're going to notice when you're consistent with a value and when you're not. So if one of your values is health, and you have a huge bowl of ice cream tonight, you're going to notice that. That's emotional, not physical health. Who cares about physical health? I'm changing the definition tonight. No, and there's no judgment there. The point is, it's back to self-awareness. You're going to start to notice when I'm living the value, when I'm not living the value, and you're going to ask yourself, is this really important to me or not? And there's no judgment there. If you decide after 3 months, this is not one of my top 5 values, then substitute it with something else. It's the process of refining, like he was asking earlier. Sometimes as we get older and our lives change, some of our values change. So you may find 6 months from now, 1 or 2 of your values may change. That's totally fine. But it's once you have your 5, then it's about how can I live that value, back to the point around alignment, how can I live that alignment more often? Now here's the risk-taking part. The risk-taking part is take this home to your partner or your spouse and have them rank you on how consistently they think you're living these values.
That's risk-taking.
That's right. So it'll be a really interesting conversation, yes. What's that? First what? Yeah, have them. Yeah, you don't just throw yourself out there. Have them go through the exercise so it's a two-way street. I like the way you're thinking about that. That's a great point. Yeah, Brian. What's that?
Are you sure married couples should share that?
Well, as I said, that's the risk-taking part. I don't know where your relationship is, Brian, so that's up to you. All right, so thanks for going through that. We'll have maybe some time for Q&A, or what do we got for time?
Well, we got 15 minutes.
Okay.
I think one thing that maybe we finish up with, in my experience, the values exercise and working through all of that, adding passions and strengths and so forth, in terms of what are those things for you, ought to ultimately lead to, in my view, defining a purpose for yourself. What is your purpose? And sometimes people say, well, what do you mean? What does that mean? Many people have not examined the question of purpose. But I think some of this work leads to defining purpose. So I wanted to ask you, Chuck, because in the book you make reference to the importance of purpose, but what's the difference in your view between having a purpose and being purposeful? What's the difference there?
Yeah, I think Richard Leiter talks about big P, little p.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
So Richard Leiter, anybody know who Richard Leiter is? I know he's spoken to the symposium here.
He's been here many times, yeah.
Richard Leiter, by the way, if you don't know who Richard Leiter is, he wrote the foreword for our book. He's an expert on purpose. But here's the interesting thing about Richard, and I've known him for a long time, but I just recently in the last 5 or 6 years learned this about Richard. Anybody know who Viktor Frankl is? Ever heard the name Viktor Frankl? Oh, yeah. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychologist, Jewish psychologist that was interned in a concentration camp in World War II. And he survived, obviously, and wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. It was published in the 50s, and he writes about what he learned in the concentration camp. And one of the things he learned about in the concentration camp was, for the most part, people who survived the concentration camp identified meaning or purpose in their lives and were able to survive that horrific experience because they were clear about the purpose that they had. And so one of his ahas that he talks about in the book was suffering helps you identify meaning or purpose. It's actually a blessing because you're able to clarify what really matters in life. So anyway, Victor writes this book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is an epic book, also a timeless book. And Richard Leiter studied under Viktor Frankl at Yale in like the 60s. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, no, I did too.
Yeah, so Richard Leiter is a great, voice expert on purpose. I think about being purposeful as being intentional. I think purpose about the kind of the direction of my life. What's the impact I want to have on, with my life? When I look back on my life, what's the impact I want to have known that my life stood for? I'm sorry? Perfect. Yeah. Everybody hear that? What are they going to say about my eulogy?
Yeah.
It's a great way to think. What do I want my life to stand for? Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of important stuff here in this book. We want to honor your time, but any questions that this whole conversation has brought up, please, and grab the microphone. It'll be good.
I would ask, how would you define success?
Great question. Everybody hear the question? How do you define success? The way I define it is living my values. If I get to live my values, and we find that to be common across most people, is we may have different definitions of success, but the common definition is if we could each live our values more consistently, we would consider ourselves successful. It's a great question. Yes?
Oh, just to bring it back to the business side.
Yes.
What would you say is the difference between a good boss and a good leader?
Wow.
That's interesting, yeah.
A good boss and a good leader. I guess it would depend on how you define boss. What do you mean when you say boss?
The person that you report to in a business, in a company.
Manager.
But you see them different, though. You must see them. And say more about how you see them differently.
Well, that was the question I wanted to answer.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I see.
How about manager versus leader?
I don't know that I see them differently. That's why I'm asking. Okay, so manager, here's the way I think about it. A manager manages things, a leader leads people. And so a lot of people are in leadership roles, but they're managing. They're managing stuff. And one of my mentors years ago said you want to, manage things, lead people. And a lot of people in leadership roles don't know how to lead people. They don't know how to do that. And that's why we have a business. Because that's what we do is leadership can be learned. Some people are born with leadership talent, but you can also learn how to be a more effective leader. And so you can be a great boss that manages things. I think if you're thinking about it from a manager standpoint, you manage things. It's also the difference between being efficient and being effective. You want to be effective with people and be efficient with things.
You really want to have both, I think it seems to me.
Yep. Yes, Magda?
Could you give us 3 or 4 tips about being an effective leader? Practical things that a good leader should do all the time. I know we follow our values, but how does that translate into daily life?
Well, I give you 8 things in the book. How about that? But no, seriously, what we did here today, to your question about leadership, you would want to do with your people. So I understand your values, right? Because what you want as a leader is you want best efforts from your people, right? In any company or any organization, what you want is best efforts. But what you have to do as a leader, back to the boss versus leader, I have to connect what my people want for themselves to what we want as a company. So most people want to be better at their jobs and their company needs them to be. The problem is nobody ever asks. So nobody says, hey, Magda, where do you want to go with your career here? Nobody ever asks that. We get a goal, so, we're running our company and we decide we're going to hit this goal this year. We take that goal, we divide it up amongst the 35 people that are in the room. Everybody gets a share, and then we say, Sam, you know what your goal is? Okay, great. Any questions? Good, perfect. And then we measure you against that goal. But nobody says, hey, Sam, how good do you want to be here? Because Sam may want to blow her goal away because she has other ambitions, like she wants to get promoted, or she wants a big bonus because she's buying a house. So what we would advocate is you go through the values card exercise and ask people what they want for themselves. Like, how good do you want to be here? Well, I want your job. Okay, great. Let me help you get that. Because if I can get you promoted to my job, that means I'm getting promoted. So it's an abundant mentality.
Maybe a little bit of a long-winded tee-up, but Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Yes.
I'm just kind of curious with your consulting business. When you go in and work, you probably see some toxicity, some dysfunction, some unhealthiness, some lack of effectiveness. If you were to kind of delineate that down to essence of what you're seeing, and then what is the prescription to deal with that disease? I just would love to maybe share a few more stories or kind of distill down with all of your clients. Is there something kind of core that you're seeing? And then again, what's kind of that prescription to kind of address that disease?
That's a great question. We have a saying in our business that we work with the willing. So where people want to get better is the biggest driver of whether or not they actually do get better. So the 2 things that we see that hold people back, one of them we've already talked about tonight. One is lack of self-awareness. Because nothing gets better if I am not self-aware, if I think I'm perfect. Narcissism is real, and there's insecurities that go with narcissism, and people have a hard time looking at themselves. The second thing they have a hard time with is believing that some of their behavior has to change. So every pattern of behavior we have is a pattern because at some point it worked for us. That's the reason it's a pattern. Right? And so what happens is, as we get older and our lives change, some of those patterns stop working for us, but we keep demonstrating the pattern. And so part of our work is to help people see the patterns that are working for them and the patterns that are holding them back. And when you think about changing behavior, so we think about it in 3 stages. So the 3 stages of behavioral change, the first step is I have to notice. So that's self-awareness. I have to notice the pattern of behavior. And by the way, you can use this playing the freeze exercise. So start to notice when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're tired, when you're drained, when you're stressed, right? I had an example many years ago. I was sitting with a friend of mine, and we were talking about how our days went, and she was asking me about my day, and I said, man, I'm just worn out and exhausted. And she said to me, you say that all the time. And I said, no, I don't. She goes, yeah, you do. I said, no, I don't. And she goes, yeah, you do. And now, convinced I was right, what do you think I started paying attention to? How often I said it. And what do you think I realized? I said it a lot, right? So it wasn't even my self-awareness. It was somebody else calling my attention to that forced me to notice it. The second step is then to understand where that pattern came from. Where did I start demonstrating that pattern? Because there's usually a point in our lives, could be our family, could be some crisis that happened in my life, whatever. Where did that pattern start? So I worked with a very successful female executive about 10 years ago. Her name was Sharon. One of the patterns we were noticing was Sharon sacrificed everything for everybody else, never took care of herself. And so she was about 100 pounds overweight. She made a lot of money, and she was miserable. So we were noticing, in fact, her homework item was, I want you to notice, Sharon, how often you sacrifice yourself to help somebody else. What are your boundaries? When you're sacrificing your boundaries, your needs, how often is that happening? She came back a few weeks later, she was kind of panicked. She goes, I did what you said, but I don't even know what my needs are.
Huh.
And I said, okay, Sharon, where did you learn that your needs didn't matter? And without any hesitation, she said, I was raised by a single mom. And when I was 7 years old, my mom came down with cancer. And from 7 years old till 11, when my mom died, I took care of my mom. Now, that's what Sharon needed to do to survive as a kid, but it's counter to what most children learn. Their parents take care of them. Sharon learned she took care of her parents, her mom. And she continued that well into her 50s. So she took care of her clients. She took care of her staff. Her husband stayed at home. She had 2 adult children that didn't have jobs, that lived at home. And she'd go to work at 7:30 in the morning, come home at 8 o'clock at night, skip lunch, not work out, eat one huge meal at like 9 o'clock at night, go to bed at 11, do it all over. So she understood that what worked for her at 7 years old wasn't working for her now at 50. And then the third step is, back to decision making, you get to decide, do I want to keep that pattern or do I want to change it? But it's this noticing, self-awareness, understanding where I started it, and then deciding what else do I want to do? What other behavior could I demonstrate that would be more effective? And we used to have a saying at Think to Perform, simple and easy are not synonymous. Changing behavior is simple, but changing behavior is not always easy. So it takes practice and repetition to do that. That's a great question.
Wow. Good stuff. Good stuff. I want to just sort of wrap with a couple of thank yous. All of you for coming and participating and really being engaged in this whole process. And I hope that you take it home and continue to work it. Thanks also to James Kenley of the symposium and Megan and the others that helped put these things together. It makes our community a better place. So thank you, James. And thank you, Chuck, for wisdom and for being here with us. And we want you to come back.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
Let's hear it for Chuck.
Happy to do it. Thank you.
Chuck Wachendorfer and John Horan Cates.